Please welcome to the stage Dr. Erin Jablonski.
Three years ago, I was at a children's museum with my family and my friend's son. While watching the kids play that day, I kept getting other ideas for exhibits and activities. And I thought, I could design these things. Students could design these things. This could be so many cool projects. That day, I sent a text message to my friend. It said, "We should open a children's museum." Now, if we can all agree that to some extent, to embrace the entrepreneurial mindset is to see a thing that isn't, but should be, and make it so, that is, to recognize an opportunity, consider if it is feasible to pursue, and then actually do it, then I would make the case that the entrepreneurial mindset is developed in large part by working on authentic projects. Many stories start with a moment that changed everything. That text message from 3 years ago starts this one. Lewisburg Children's Museum opened 20 months to the day from that text message. From early planning through ribbon cutting, and continuing now, hundreds of Bucknell students have worked on conceptual design, prototyping, testing, and even building exhibits. And many of them have had that elusive encounter with a truly authentic project. Now, authentic projects actually share many of the same characteristics as our typical design projects. Often students have only a semester or two. They're given a project description, an external client. They may be provided a budget and select or are assigned a team of peers. But at the end of a typical design project, the deliverables usually include a written report, a presentation, a poster session, maybe something like an elevator pitch, and some artifact resembling a feasible prototype. That feasible prototype does not usually have any predictable service lifetime, or even the expectation of direct implementation. And student engagement varies widely. Imagine, though, that you could motivate your students' engagement by partnering with clients and users that capture your students' interests. Imagine also that you could offer your students design-build opportunities that culminated in public delivery. That was exactly what we had with the museum. We were going to design and build educational exhibits. And these would be authentic projects that arose from inspired design and public delivery. Debbie Sterling, founder of Goldilocks, in her TEDx talk about encouraging the next generation of female engineers, says this: "Engineering is really the skill set to build anything you dream up. How empowering to be able to build whatever you want." And this speaks directly to my experiences working with students to design things for the museum. Although this should have been unfamiliar territory, the basic rules of design don't change. What problem are we trying to solve? Who are the users? What's feasible, and what can we actually afford? The problem statement that derives from figuring out what they actually need is not always what they've asked for, because children ask for crazy things, entirely unfettered by what is either technically feasible or affordable. Students were challenged by these criteria and constraints. They had to really understand their user, children, to figure out what they were trying to accomplish. They had to research alternatives, benchmark, prototype, test, and repeat. This was just design, but design inspired by educational goals and imaginative play. The sense of satisfaction that students felt when they completed museum projects had to do with the fact that their team was able to be inspired. They were inspired to dream up designs. Students were inspired by the fact the kids were actually going to use their thing, whatever it was. And then in the work with their teams, they had the sense, we did this. Conversations were never limited by the thinking, only professional museum exhibit designers should do this or make this. Often students have access to makerspace resources, but they don't always have a great idea for a thing to build or a project to work on. That is, they want to do the making. They just don't know what to make. And this is really a missed opportunity. Often, students can be prompted to engage in the skills building if they're inspired by a cool project to work on or a thing to build. And then, in that design and fabrication, students could be anywhere on the spectrum from build a prototype exactly as the client has requested, to use your imagination to fulfill the aims of what this exhibit is supposed to demonstrate. And we can really place this on the spectrum from novice to expert. And well-selected, authentic projects actually inspire our students to want to grow that design expertise. So think about where you can find partners that students can work with to practice inspired design. Now, I've said also that authentic projects arise from both that inspired design and from public delivery. So think also about where you can get students outside of their on-campus comfort zone to work on projects that result in public delivery. But this is not a new idea. In fact, it is often associated with service learning. We know from the literature that service learning has the potential to address many of the issues facing engineering education. Campus Compact, a national coalition of college and university presidents who are committed to fulfilling the civic purposes of higher education, has made this case for us. Service learning integrates community service with academic education. Students apply their classroom content to community projects, enhancing learning while providing services to underserved populations. And we also know that placing these projects in a societal context with community relevance encourages participation from traditionally underrepresented groups in engineering and can even improve student retention. And focusing on projects with direct community application meets industry's needs for graduates with more real-world experiences. So, doesn't that all sound like what we all endeavor to do? Yet, how do we actually introduce design projects to students? We provide a syllabus so they know what it is worth. And then we tell them if they do a good enough job, maybe a client could implement their design or solution. Authentic projects need to take this a step further. What if you told your students that their work was going to be installed and immediately in use by the public? That durability, safety, and intuitive user interface, all of these things had to be considered right from the start, not just as nice-to-have features, but as requirements for successful project completion. While other design project clients may have been satisfied with those frail prototypes, the museum often asked students to install their exhibits. And something changed when students knew they were going to be installing their work for direct and immediate use by the public. Faced with drilling into floors and walls, with the potential of making an enduring contribution or doing permanent damage, students planned more thoughtfully, they executed more deliberately, and they evaluated themselves more realistically. The biggest difference that I saw between museum projects and other design projects I had worked with students on was that final delivery in a place that students could later visit meant that regardless of the grade they had earned, they would know whether their project was a long-term success. If they came back to the museum a year later and their exhibit was missing, that meant it could not withstand use by a few hundred kids per week. But if they came back to the museum and they got to see their exhibit in place and in use, they got to relive that sense of accomplishment and enduring contribution all over again. This is the type of feedback they could never get from a red pen or even a gratefully worded email from a client. This was authentic. There was this tangible accountability that motivated and engaged students. And authentic environments are all around us. You could go to community centers, urban gardens, public schools. Think about where you can get your students outside of their on-campus comfort zone and develop and deploy their skills, working on authentic projects in the community. Before I close, I want to convince you that authentic projects have this other advantage of encouraging participation from across the spectrum of student identity. I cannot advocate for everyone to start a children's museum, but I want to share one interesting observation, and it was tied to something we all had in common. Think about this. The main qualification for being able to empathize with the users in this story, to imagine how children would want to learn and play, was to have been a child And everyone was able to bring their diverse perspective to the design process and the team dynamic. Everyone had something to contribute. So actually, this is not a story about building a children's museum. This is a story about how students can experience the value of authentic projects. These authentic projects that arise from inspired design and culminate in public delivery, engage our students, grow their design expertise, and develop their entrepreneurial mindset. Thank you.